Lost bear cub followed a ranger for miles. What happened at the river crossing shocked everyone. The morning air in the Cascade Range was crisp and cold, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth. Ranger Tom Mitchell adjusted the straps of his backpack and stepped carefully over a fallen log, his boots crunching against the frosted undergrowth. He had been patrolling the northern sector of the park for nearly 3 hours, checking trail markers and looking for signs of illegal camping. The forest was quiet, save for the occasional chatter of a squirrel or the distant call of a crow. Tom liked it that way. After 20 years as a ranger, solitude had become his closest companion. He paused near a small clearing to take a drink from his canteen, his breath visible in the October chill. That's when he heard it, a soft, high-pitched whimper. Tom froze, his instincts kicking in. He knew that sound. It was the cry of something young, something vulnerable. He scanned the tree line, his eyes narrowing as he searched for movement. Then he saw it, a small brown shape stumbling through the bushes about 30 yards away. A bear cub. It couldn't have been more than 4 or 5 months old, its fur still fluffy and uneven, its movements clumsy and uncertain. Tom's heart sank. A cub this young shouldn't be alone. He looked around carefully, expecting to see the mother somewhere nearby. Black bears were common in this area, and a mother with cubs was nothing to take lightly. But the forest remained still. No rustling branches, no protective growl, no massive silhouette charging toward him. The cub whimpered again, louder this time, and took a few hesitant steps in Tom's direction. "Easy there, little one," Tom murmured, keeping his voice low and calm. He didn't move. The cub stopped, tilting its head as if trying to understand. Its dark eyes were wide and glassy, and Tom could see the exhaustion in its small frame. Its fur was matted with dirt, and there were small scratches along its muzzle. This cub had been through something. If you're enjoying this story, please subscribe and stay with us. Tom's mind raced. Protocol dictated that he should radio in immediately, report the lone cub, and wait for wildlife services to handle it. But something stopped him. The cub took another step forward, then another, its little paws pressing into the soft earth. It wasn't aggressive or afraid, it was desperate. Tom had seen that look before, in the eyes of animals who had lost their families, their safety, their entire world. He took a slow step backward, testing. The cub followed. Tom stopped. The cub stopped. He turned slightly and began walking at an angle, heading back toward the main trail. The cub followed again, keeping a distance of about 10 feet. Tom's chest tightened. This wasn't normal behavior. Cubs didn't follow humans. They ran, they hid, they waited for their mothers. Unless the mother was gone. Tom walked for another 100 yards, and the cub stayed with him, its small body moving with a dogged determination that was almost heartbreaking. Every few steps, it would pause and let out a soft cry, as if asking Tom to wait, to not leave it behind. Tom stopped near a cluster of birch trees and turned to face the cub fully. It sat down on its haunches, panting lightly, its pink tongue visible. "Where's your mama, huh?" Tom asked softly, though he already suspected the answer. He pulled out his radio and hesitated. If he called this in now, they'd send a team. The cub would be tranquilized, taken to a facility, assessed. If the mother couldn't be found, and given the cub's condition, that seemed likely, it would either be placed in a wildlife rehabilitation center or, in the worst case, euthanized if it was deemed too habituated to humans or too young to survive on its own. Tom looked at the cub again. It was watching him with an intensity that unnerved him. Not with fear, but with something closer to trust or hope. He clipped the radio back onto his belt without making the call. "All right," he said quietly, more to himself than to the cub. "Let's see where you came from." Tom altered his route, heading northwest toward a section of the forest where he'd heard reports of poaching activity a few weeks earlier. It was possible the mother had been killed or injured, and the cub had been wandering since. If he could find evidence, tracks, a den, anything, it might help determine the next steps. As he walked, the cub followed. Not closely, but consistently. It seemed to understand that Tom wasn't a threat, that he was moving with purpose. The forest grew denser as they climbed a gentle slope, the sunlight filtering through the canopy in scattered beams. Tom paused occasionally to check the ground, looking for prints or scat, but found nothing conclusive. The cub, meanwhile, was struggling. Its breathing had grown heavier, and once or twice it stumbled over roots, letting out small, pitiful sounds. Tom's resolve wavered. He should stop. He should call this in. But something kept him moving forward. Maybe it was stubbornness. Maybe it was the memory of his own losses. His wife, gone 5 years now to cancer. His daughter, estranged and living 2 states away. Maybe it was the simple, undeniable fact that this cub had chosen him for whatever reason, and he didn't have the heart to abandon it. After another mile, the terrain began to change. The forest opened up slightly, and Tom could hear the distant rush of water. The Clearwater River. It ran fast this time of year, swollen with early snowmelt from the higher elevations. Tom had crossed it dozens of times using the old Ranger Bridge about half a mile downstream, but here, where they stood, the river was wild and uncrossable on foot. The cub stopped at the edge of the tree line, staring at the water. It let out a long, mournful cry. Tom turned back to look at it, and for the first time he saw something flicker in the cub's eyes. Recognition. The cub wasn't just following him. It was leading him, or trying to show him something. "What is it?" Tom asked, crouching down slowly. The cub took a few steps toward the river, then looked back at Tom, then at the water again. It repeated the motion, as if urging him forward. Tom stood and walked carefully to the riverbank. The water was fast and dark, churning over rocks and fallen branches. On the opposite side, about 60 yards across, the forest continued, thick and shadowed. Tom scanned the far bank, squinting against the glare of the water. At first, he saw nothing. Then, just barely visible among the roots of a massive Douglas fir, he spotted it. A dark shape, unmoving. Another bear, larger, lying still. Tom's breath caught. The mother. Tom's pulse quickened as he stared across the river. The shape didn't move. From this distance he couldn't tell if the bear was alive or dead, but the cub's behavior suddenly made terrible sense. It had been trying to get back to its mother, but the river, swollen and violent, had separated them. How long had this cub been wandering alone, crying for a mother it could see but couldn't reach? He pulled out his binoculars from his pack and focused on the far bank. The bear was an adult female, probably 3 or 4 years old, lying on her side beneath the exposed roots of the tree. Her fur was matted and dark with moisture. Tom adjusted the focus, searching for signs of breathing, any rise and fall of the rib cage. For a long moment he saw nothing. Then, barely perceptible, a slight movement. The bear's head shifted an inch. She was alive, barely. Tom lowered the binoculars, his mind racing. The mother was injured or sick, unable to move, unable to cross back to her cub, and the cub, driven by instinct and desperation, had been searching for help, or maybe just for someone who wouldn't abandon it. Tom looked down at the small bear, who was now sitting at the water's edge, staring across with an expression that could only be described as longing. "Your mama's over there, isn't she?" Tom said softly. The cub didn't turn to look at him. Its entire focus was on the opposite bank. Tom pulled out his radio, and this time he pressed the call button. Static crackled, then a voice came through. "Base to Mitchell, go ahead." "Yeah, this is Mitchell. I'm about 2 miles northwest of Marker 7 near the Clearwater. I've got a situation here. Lone cub, maybe 5 months old, and what looks like an injured adult female on the opposite bank. The river's too high to cross on foot. I'm going to need wildlife services and possibly a rescue team." There was a pause. "Copy that, Mitchell. Can you confirm the adult is alive?" Tom raised the binoculars again. The bear's head had moved slightly, and he thought he saw one of her paws twitch. "Affirmative. She's alive, but not moving much. Could be injured, could be hypothermia. Hard to say from here." "Understood. We'll dispatch a team. but it's going to take at least 3 hours to get equipment out there. The roads are rough this time of year. Can you maintain visual? Tom looked at the cub, then back at the river. 3 hours. In 3 hours the temperature would drop further. The mother might not make it. And the cub, this fragile, exhausted little creature, would be alone for good. "I'll do what I can," Tom said. "Mitchell out." He clipped the radio back and sat down on a flat rock near the water's edge. The cub turned to look at him, then waddled over slowly, stopping about 5 feet away. It sat down heavily, as if the weight of the world had finally caught up with it. Tom reached into his pack and pulled out a granola bar. He unwrapped it slowly, broke off a small piece, and tossed it gently toward the cub. The cub sniffed it cautiously, then ate it in one quick bite. Tom smiled faintly. "Not exactly bear food, I know, but it's something." He tossed another piece, closer this time. The cub took it, and with each small offering it inched a bit nearer. By the 5th piece, the cub was sitting less than 3 feet from Tom's boots, chewing contentedly, its eyes half closed. Tom watched it, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something other than the dull ache of routine. He felt needed. Tom had been alone for 5 years, truly alone, since Sarah died. They'd been married for 23 years, and she'd been his anchor, the person who made the silence of the forest bearable because he always knew he'd come home to her. After she passed, the silence had become suffocating. His daughter Emily had tried to stay close at first, but grief had driven a wedge between them. She'd wanted him to move, to leave the ranger station, to start over somewhere less isolated. He'd refused. The forest was all he had left. Eventually, Emily stopped calling. Last he heard, she was in Portland, working as a nurse, building a life he wasn't part of. He looked at the cub again. It had curled up beside the rock, its small body rising and falling with steady breaths. Asleep, trusting. Tom stood slowly, careful not to wake it, and walked back to the river's edge. He studied the current, the width, the rocks jutting out at irregular intervals. The Ranger Bridge was half a mile downstream, but that would take at least 30 minutes round trip, and there was no guarantee he could reach the mother from that side either. The forest was thick, and the terrain near the river was treacherous with mud and hidden drop-offs. But there was another option, a riskier one. About 20 yards upstream, a fallen cedar tree stretched part-way across the river. It didn't reach all the way, but it extended far enough that if Tom could get to the end of it, he'd only have to navigate about 30 feet of open water. He'd done river crossings before, plenty of them, but never in conditions like this, and never alone. He turned back to check on the cub. Still asleep. He had time. Tom walked upstream to examine the fallen tree. It was thick, maybe 3 feet in diameter, and relatively stable, wedged between 2 large boulders on this side. The bark was slick with moisture, but the wood itself looked solid. He tested it with his boot, applying pressure. It held. He climbed up carefully, balancing with his arms outstretched, and walked about 10 feet along its length. The roar of the water below was deafening, and the spray from the rapids soaked his pant legs. He stopped where the tree began to narrow and looked ahead. The remaining distance to the far bank was daunting. If he slipped, the current would take him downstream in seconds. Tom backed off the tree and returned to the rock where the cub slept. He sat down, pulling out his phone. No signal, as expected. He opened the photo gallery, something he rarely did anymore, and scrolled through the images. Sarah smiling at the coast. Emily as a child, holding a rescued fawn. The 3 of them together on Emily's high school graduation day. He stared at the last photo for a long time. "I wasn't there when you needed me, Em," he whispered. "Not really." The cub stirred, letting out a small whimper in its sleep. Tom pocketed the phone and looked back at the river, then at the shape of the mother bear on the far side. She hadn't moved. Time was running out. He made his decision. Tom stood and quietly gathered what he'd need. Rope, his first aid kit, a thermal blanket, and a flare in case things went south. He secured everything tightly to his pack, then knelt beside the cub. It blinked awake, looking up at him with sleepy, trusting eyes. "I'm going to go get your mama," Tom said, his voice steady despite the fear curling in his chest. "You stay here, okay? I'll be back." The cub tilted its head, as if it understood. Tom reached out slowly, hesitantly, and touched the top of its head. The fur was soft and warm. The cub leaned into his hand, just slightly, and Tom felt his throat tighten. He stood, shouldered his pack, and walked toward the fallen cedar. Behind him, the cub scrambled to its feet and followed. Tom stopped. "No, you stay." The cub sat down obediently, but didn't take its eyes off him. Tom climbed back onto the tree and began moving forward step by careful step. The wood groaned under his weight, and the water below churned and roared. He focused on his breathing, on the placement of each foot. 10 feet, 20. The tree narrowed, and he crouched lower, using his hands for balance. 30 feet. He was near the end now, where the tree dipped slightly into the water. Spray drenched his face, and his boots slipped once, sending his heart into his throat. He caught himself, gripping the bark with both hands. Just a bit farther, Tom reached the end of the fallen cedar and stopped, his chest heaving. The tree dipped into the churning water here, submerged just enough that the current pulled at it, creating a constant, violent spray. Beyond this point, there was nothing but 30 feet of open river, fast, deep, and unforgiving. He looked back toward the near bank. The cub was standing now, watching him intently, its small silhouette framed against the forest. Tom uncoiled the rope from his pack and tied one end securely around his waist, then looped the other end around the thickest part of the tree trunk. It wouldn't stop him from being swept away entirely, but it might give him a chance if he lost his footing. He took a deep breath, said a silent prayer to no one in particular, and stepped off the tree into the river. The cold hit him like a physical blow. The water was snowmelt, barely above freezing, and it clawed at his legs with a ferocity that nearly knocked him over immediately. Tom gritted his teeth and pushed forward, using his arms to steady himself against the current. Each step was a battle. The riverbed was uneven, covered in slick stones that shifted under his weight. Twice his foot slipped into gaps between rocks, and he had to wrench it free while the water tried to pull him downstream. Halfway across, the water rose to his waist. His legs were going numb, and his muscles screamed in protest. He could feel the rope around his waist pulling taut as the current tried to drag him. His breaths came in sharp, painful gasps. For a moment, he considered turning back. This was insane. He was risking his life for a bear, an animal that, if it survived, would never remember him, never thank him. But then he thought of the cub, waiting on the other side, alone. And he thought of Emily, and all the times he should have crossed the difficult rivers in his own life, but hadn't. All the times he'd chosen safety over connection, isolation over risk. Not this time. Tom pushed forward with renewed determination. The water began to shallow slightly as he neared the far bank. His boots found purchase on larger stones. 10 feet, 5. Then his hand grabbed onto an exposed root, and he hauled himself up onto the muddy shore, collapsing onto his hands and knees. His entire body shook, from cold, from exertion, from adrenaline. He coughed up water he didn't remember swallowing and forced himself to breathe. After a moment, he looked up. The mother bear was less than 30 yards away, still lying beneath the roots of the Douglas fir. Tom untied the rope from his waist with numb fingers and struggled to his feet. His legs barely held him. He stumbled forward, every step deliberate, calling out softly so as not to startle her if she was conscious. "Easy, girl. I'm here to help. Easy." As he got closer, the full picture came into view, and Tom's stomach twisted. The bear was in bad shape. Her breathing was shallow and labored, and her left hind leg was grotesquely swollen, bent at an unnatural angle. A trap. Tom saw it immediately. The rusted metal jaws clamped around her lower leg, half buried in the mud. Blood had dried around the wound, and the surrounding tissue was inflamed and discolored. She'd been caught here for at least a day, maybe more. Jesus, Tom whispered. Illegal traps were still a problem in some parts of the park, set by poachers targeting deer or elk. But they didn't discriminate. Anything that stepped wrong could end up like this. The bear's eyes were half open, glassy and unfocused. She didn't react to Tom's approach. He knelt slowly beside her, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. Her fur was cold and damp. Her pulse, when he found it, was weak and irregular. She was in shock, her body shutting down from pain, blood loss and hypothermia. Tom pulled out his radio, his hands shaking so badly he nearly dropped it. "Mitchell to base. Come in." Static. Then, "Base here. Go ahead, Mitchell. I'm on the West Bank. The adult female is trapped. Illegal leg trap. She's critical. Shock, severe leg trauma, possible hypothermia. I need that wildlife team here now. And bring bolt cutters. Heavy duty." A pause. "Copy that. Team is en route. ETA 2 hours, maybe less. Can you stabilize her?" Tom looked at the bear's mangled leg, at her shallow breathing, at the way her body seemed to be giving up. 2 hours. She might not have 2 hours. "I'll try," he said. "Mitchell out." He set down the radio and opened his first aid kit, though he knew the supplies inside were meant for humans, not a 200-pound black bear. Still, the principles were the same. Stop the bleeding. Maintain body temperature. Prevent further shock. He pulled out the thermal blanket and draped it carefully over the bear's torso, tucking it around her as best he could. She didn't stir. He examined the trap more closely. It was old, cruel, the kind with serrated teeth designed to hold, not release. The jaws had crushed through muscle and possibly bone. Even if they got her out, the leg might not be salvageable. Tom tried to remember everything he'd learned in his wildlife first responder training 20 years ago. He pulled out gauze and began carefully cleaning around the wound, though there was only so much he could do without removing the trap. The bear's breathing hitched once, and a low, weak moan escaped her throat. Tom froze, but she didn't move. She was too far gone to be a threat. "You're a fighter, aren't you?" Tom murmured, working as gently as he could. "You stayed alive for your baby. That's what kept you going, wasn't it?" He thought about the cub, still on the other side of the river. How long had it been trying to reach its mother? How many times had it cried out, only to hear no answer? The thought made his chest ache. As Tom worked, he noticed something else. Beneath the mother's body, partially hidden in the mud, were small paw prints. Cubs, plural. Tom's heart sank further. He looked around quickly, scanning the forest, the underbrush, the shadows. Were there more? Had there been siblings? He stood and walked a slow circle around the area, searching. About 15 feet away, near a cluster of ferns, he found what he was afraid he'd find. A small, still shape. Another cub. This one had been dead for at least a day, its body already beginning to stiffen. Tom closed his eyes and forced himself to breathe. The mother had been trapped, unable to move, unable to protect or feed her cubs. One had died here, the other had survived somehow and gone searching for help. Tom returned to the mother bear and knelt beside her again. He placed his hand on her head between her ears. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I'm so sorry this happened to you." The bear's eyes opened slightly, just for a moment, and Tom could have sworn she looked at him, really looked at him. There was no fear in her gaze, no aggression, just exhaustion, and maybe in some way he couldn't fully explain, gratitude. Tom stayed with her, monitoring her breathing, adjusting the blanket, talking to her in a low, steady voice. He told her about the cub. He told her it was safe. He told her help was coming. He didn't know if she could hear him or understand, but it felt important to say it anyway. Time passed slowly. The sun moved across the sky, and the temperature began to drop. Tom's wet clothes were still clinging to him, and he started to shiver uncontrollably. He knew he was at risk for hypothermia himself, but he couldn't leave her. Not now. He pulled out the flare from his pack and set it aside, ready to use if the rescue team had trouble finding them. Across the river, he could still see the cub, a small brown dot near the water's edge. It hadn't moved. It was waiting. Tom's radio crackled to life. "Mitchell, this is base. Team is 15 minutes out. They're coming in from the Western Access Road. Can you mark your position?" Tom grabbed the flare, struck it, and held it high above his head. Bright red smoke billowed into the air, visible through the canopy. "Flare is up. You should see the smoke." "We've got you. Hang tight." Tom lowered the flare and set it on the ground, letting it burn. He looked down at the mother bear. Her breathing had grown even shallower. He wasn't sure she'd make it to 15 minutes. He leaned down close to her ear. "They're almost here. Just hold on a little longer. Your baby needs you." The forest around them was silent, except for the rush of the river and the hiss of the flare. Tom sat back on his heels, and for the first time in years, he prayed. Not for himself, but for this bear, for her cub, for the chance to make something right in a world that so often felt irreparably broken. The sound of engines broke through the forest silence first, rough and labored, fighting against the terrain. Tom looked up, relief flooding through him despite the cold that had settled deep into his bones. Within minutes, he heard voices, the snap of branches, and then 3 figures emerged from the tree line. 2 wildlife officers in dark green uniforms, and a veterinarian Tom recognized from previous rescues, Dr. Sarah Chen. "Mitchell!" Dr. Chen called out, jogging toward him with a large medical kit slung over her shoulder. Behind her, the 2 officers carried between them a heavy-duty stretcher, bolt cutters, and what looked like a portable IV setup. Tom stood on shaking legs, his teeth chattering. "She's here. Leg trap. She's barely hanging on." Dr. Chen dropped to her knees beside the bear, immediately checking vitals, while one of the officers, a younger man named Derek, began examining the trap. The other officer, an older woman named Paula, moved to Tom's side and draped a dry emergency blanket over his shoulders. "You crossed that river?" Paula asked, her voice a mix of disbelief and concern as she looked back toward the churning water. "Didn't have much choice," Tom said through chattering teeth. "The cub's still on the other side. It can't cross." Paula followed his gaze across the river, spotting the small shape still waiting on the far bank. Her expression softened. "That baby's been waiting for its mama for at least a day," Tom confirmed. "Maybe more. There was another cub. Didn't make it." Paula's jaw tightened, but she nodded. "We'll get them both through this, if we can." Dr. Chen worked quickly, her hands steady and efficient, despite the grim situation. She listened to the bear's heart and lungs with a stethoscope, checked her temperature with a digital thermometer, and examined the trapped leg with a penlight. Her face remained professionally neutral, but Tom could see the concern in her eyes. "She's in severe shock," Dr. Chen announced. "Heart rate is 40 beats per minute, way too low. Body temperature is 89 degrees. She's hypothermic and septic. That leg has been trapped for at least 24 hours, probably longer. Infection has set in." She looked up at Derek, who was still examining the trap. "Can you get that thing off her?" Derek positioned the bolt cutters carefully, trying to find the best angle. "It's rusted shut. These old traps are built like tanks. Give me a minute." "We don't have a minute," Dr. Chen said, not unkindly, as she began setting up an IV line. "Every second counts. Paula, help me get this catheter in." Paula moved to assist, holding the bear's front leg steady while Dr. Chen worked to find a vein. It took 3 attempts. The bear's blood pressure was so low that her veins had collapsed. But finally the catheter slid in, and Dr. Chen connected it to a bag of warmed saline and antibiotics. "This will help stabilize her," Dr. Chen explained, mostly to herself, working through the protocol out loud. "But we need that trap off now. The longer it stays on, the more toxins build up in her system. When we release it, she could go into cardiac arrest from the sudden circulation of contaminated blood." Tom felt his stomach drop. "What are you saying?" Dr. Chen met his eyes. "I'm saying removing the trap could kill her, but leaving it on definitely will." Derek grunted with effort, repositioning the bolt cutters. "Almost got it." There was a sharp metallic crack, and one side of the trap's jaw broke free. The bear's body jerked slightly, and she let out a weak, guttural moan. Derek quickly moved to the other side and applied pressure again. Another crack. The trap fell open, releasing its grip on the mangled leg. The bear's breathing immediately became more labored. Her body convulsed once, violently, and Dr. Chen's hands flew to the IV, adjusting the drip rate. "She's crashing. Paula, get the epinephrine ready. Tom, I need you to help hold her steady." Tom dropped down beside the bear's head, placing his hands firmly on her shoulders. Her fur was still cold beneath his palms, and he could feel the rapid, erratic flutter of her heartbeat. "Come on, girl. Stay with us." Dr. Chen worked with the precision of someone who'd done this 100 times, injecting medication, monitoring vitals, adjusting the IV. Paula kept pressure on the wounded leg with thick gauze pads, trying to control the fresh bleeding that had started when the trap was removed. The forest around them seemed to hold its breath. 30 seconds passed. A minute. The bear's breathing steadied slightly, becoming less ragged. Her heart rate climbed, slowly, but it climbed. 50 beats per minute, 55. Dr. Chen sat back on her heels, exhaling shakily. Okay, she's stabilizing. But we need to get her out of here and into surgery within the next 2 hours, or we'll lose her." "How?" Tom asked. "The terrain's too rough for a vehicle. We're at least a mile from the nearest access road." "Stretcher carry," Paula said, standing and brushing mud from her knees. "The 4 of us. It'll be slow, but it's the only option." Derek was already unfolding the stretcher. It was a specialized unit, reinforced nylon with sturdy poles and straps designed to handle large animals. "We'll need to move her onto this carefully. Dr. Chen, can she handle being moved?" "She doesn't have a choice," Dr. Chen replied grimly. She began wrapping the injured leg in heavy bandages, stabilizing it as much as possible. "We'll splint this and keep the IV running during transport. Tom, once we start moving, I need you to monitor her breathing. If she stops, we stop." Tom nodded, still shivering despite the blanket. His mind was racing ahead, though, to the problem no one had mentioned yet. What about the cub? The 3 rescuers paused, looking at each other, then across the river. The small bear was still there, sitting exactly where Tom had left it hours ago. "We can't leave it," Tom said firmly. "It'll die out here alone." "And we can't carry both," Derek said, not unkindly. "The mother weighs at least 200 pounds, probably more. We're going to be moving slow as it is." "I'll get the cub," Tom said, "after you start moving her. I'll cross back, bring the cub, and catch up with you." Paula shook her head. "Tom, you're hypothermic. You can barely stand. Crossing that river again could kill you." "Then I'll find another way across," Tom said, his voice hardening with determination. "The Ranger Bridge is half a mile downstream. I'll go that route." "That'll add at least an hour to your travel time," Dr. Chen pointed out. "Maybe more in your condition." "I don't care." Tom looked across the river at the cub, then down at the mother bear, her chest rising and falling with fragile, hard-won breaths. That baby crossed miles of forest, alone and terrified, trying to find help for its mother. It didn't give up. I'm not giving up on it. There was a moment of silence. Then Paula nodded slowly. "All right, we'll get her moving. You do what you need to do. But Tom," she fixed him with a serious look, "don't be a hero. If you can't make it back safely, radio for another team." "Understood?" "Understood," Tom said, though he had no intention of leaving that cub behind, no matter what it took. The team worked together to carefully roll the mother bear onto the stretcher. It took all 4 of them. The bear was dead weight, her body limp and unresponsive. They secured her with straps, positioned the IV bag carefully, and made sure the splinted leg was as stable as possible. Dr. Chen did one final check of her vitals. "Heart rate is 60. She's holding. Let's move." Derek and Paula took the front handles of the stretcher. Dr. Chen took the back left, and Tom took the back right. On the count of 3, they lifted together. The weight was immense, and Tom's arms screamed in protest, but he locked his knees and held firm. "Slow and steady," Paula said. "Watch your footing." They began moving through the forest, away from the river, toward the western access road. The going was brutal. Every root, every stone, every slight incline required coordination and effort. Tom's body was beyond exhausted, running on nothing but adrenaline and will. His wet clothes had begun to freeze against his skin, and his fingers were so numb he could barely feel the stretcher handles. But he held on. After 15 minutes of slow progress, they reached a slightly clearer area where the terrain leveled out. Paula called for a brief rest. They set the stretcher down carefully, and Dr. Chen checked the bear again. Still stable, still alive. Tom stepped back, breathing hard. "I'm going for the cub now." Dr. Chen looked like she wanted to argue, but didn't. "Be safe, Tom." He nodded, turned, and began jogging back toward the river, his legs protesting every step. Behind him, he heard the stretcher lift again, and the sound of his team moving away through the forest. He was alone again, but this time he had a purpose that felt larger than himself. When he reached the riverbank, he looked across. The cub was standing now, pacing anxiously at the water's edge. It had seen the humans, seen its mother being carried away, and was clearly distressed. "I'm coming, little one," Tom called out, his voice hoarse. "Just hold on." He turned downstream and began running. Tom's lungs burned as he pushed through the forest, his boots sliding on wet leaves and moss-covered stones. The ranger bridge was half a mile downstream, but the terrain between here and there was unforgiving. Dense underbrush, fallen logs, and steep drops that required careful navigation. In his current state, soaked, freezing, and running on fumes, every step was a gamble. He stumbled over a hidden root and went down hard, his palms scraping against rough bark. For a moment, he stayed there on his hands and knees, gasping for air, his vision swimming. His body was screaming at him to stop, to rest, to call for help and let someone else handle this. But when he closed his eyes, all he saw was the cub's face, those dark eyes filled with desperate hope. Tom forced himself up and kept moving. The sound of the river was his constant companion, rushing and roaring to his right. His radio crackled intermittently with updates from the rescue team. They were making slow but steady progress toward the access road. The mother bear was still stable. Every transmission ended with the same question: "Mitchell, what's your status?" And every time Tom responded the same way: "En route to the cub, still mobile." He didn't mention that his hands had gone completely numb, or that he could no longer feel his feet inside his boots, or that his core temperature had dropped to the point where his thoughts were starting to fragment, coming in strange, disconnected bursts. He just kept moving forward. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only 20 minutes, Tom spotted the bridge through the trees. It was a simple structure, wooden planks suspended by steel cables, built decades ago for ranger patrols. It swayed slightly in the wind, and several of the planks looked weathered and questionable, but it was solid. Tom had crossed it 100 times. He stumbled onto the bridge and began crossing, gripping the cable railings tightly. Beneath him, the river churned 30 feet below, violent and unforgiving. The bridge swayed with each step, and twice Tom had to stop and steady himself as vertigo threatened to pull him sideways. His body was shutting down, conserving what little heat and energy remained. "Come on, Mitchell," he muttered to himself through chattering teeth. "Just a little farther, just get to the other side." He reached the far end of the bridge and collapsed onto solid ground, his legs finally giving out. He lay there for a long moment, staring up at the canopy, watching his breath fog in the cold air. He could stop now. He could radio for help. Another team could retrieve the cub. It would be the smart thing to do, the safe thing. But Tom had spent 5 years playing it safe, keeping everyone at arm's length, never risking the pain of connection. And what had it gotten him? An empty house, a daughter who didn't call, a life that felt like slow suffocation. He thought of Sarah, and what she would say if she could see him now. She'd probably call him an idiot for crossing that river, for risking his life for a bear. But then she'd smile, that knowing smile she always had, and tell him she was proud. Because Sarah had always understood what Tom had forgotten, that life wasn't worth living if you didn't occasionally do something reckless for the right reasons. Tom rolled onto his side, then pushed himself to his hands and knees, then to his feet. His vision blurred, and he had to brace himself against a tree until the dizziness passed. Then he started moving upstream, back toward where he'd left the cub. The forest seemed darker on this side of the river, or maybe it was just his fading awareness. He navigated more by instinct than sight, following the sound of rushing water. His radio crackled again. "Mitchell, this is Chen. We're at the access road loading the bear into the transport vehicle. What's your status? We need to know you're okay." Tom pulled the radio from his belt with clumsy, unresponsive fingers. "I'm on the West Bank, almost to the cub's location. Give me 10 minutes. There was a pause. "Tom, your speech is slurred. You need to get somewhere warm now. We can send someone back for the cub." "No," Tom said firmly, forcing clarity into his voice. "I'm getting this cub. I'll be fine. Mitchell out." He clipped the radio back and kept walking, using trees for support when his legs wobbled. Finally, after what felt like miles but was probably only a few hundred yards, he emerged at the original spot where he'd first encountered the cub. And there it was, still waiting at the water's edge, though now it was on the same side of the river as Tom. The cub saw him and immediately let out a series of high-pitched cries, running toward him with clumsy, desperate steps. Tom dropped to his knees, and the cub barreled into him, pressing its small body against his chest. Tom wrapped his arms around it instinctively, feeling its rapid heartbeat, its warmth, its fear. "I've got you," Tom whispered, his voice breaking. "I've got you. Your mama's safe. We're going to take you to her." The cub burrowed deeper into his embrace, making soft, whimpering sounds. Tom held it for a long moment, letting the animal's warmth seep into him, letting himself feel something other than cold and exhaustion. Connection. Purpose. The kind of thing he'd been running from for 5 years. But they couldn't stay here. Tom forced himself to his feet, still holding the cub. It was heavier than he'd expected, probably 30 or 40 pounds, but he managed to cradle it against his chest with one arm while using his other hand for balance. The cub didn't struggle. It seemed to understand that Tom was help, was safety, was the answer to days of desperate searching. Tom began the long walk back toward the Ranger Bridge, moving slower now with the added weight. The cub's head rested against his shoulder, and he could feel its small puffs of breath against his neck. Every few steps it would whimper softly, and Tom would murmur reassurances, though he wasn't sure if he was comforting the cub or himself. The journey back to the bridge felt twice as long. Tom's legs were barely functioning, moving on autopilot while his mind drifted in and out of focus. He thought about Emily when she was small, how she used to fall asleep in his arms just like this, her complete trust in him both terrifying and beautiful. When had he lost that? When had he become someone who pushed away instead of holding on? He reached the bridge as the sun began its descent toward the horizon, casting long shadows through the forest. The temperature was dropping fast. It would be below freezing within the hour. Tom adjusted his grip on the cub and stepped onto the bridge, moving carefully. Each plank creaked under their combined weight, and the bridge swayed more dramatically than before. But Tom kept his eyes forward, focused on the opposite bank. Halfway across, his boot came down on a weathered plank that gave way with a sharp crack. Tom's leg plunged through the gap up to his knee, and he pitched forward violently. In that split second, his only thought was of the cub. He twisted his body as he fell, taking the impact on his shoulder and hip while holding the cub above the broken boards. Pain exploded through his leg and side, but he kept his arms locked around the small bear. The cub let out a frightened cry, but it was unharmed. Tom lay there for a moment, half his body on the bridge, his leg dangling through the broken plank. Below him, the river roared. His shoulder screamed where it had struck the boards. Slowly, carefully, he pulled his leg back up through the gap. His pants were torn, and he could feel blood running down his shin. But nothing seemed broken. "We're okay," he told the cub, though his voice shook. We're okay. He crawled forward on his hands and knees, the cub still clutched against his chest, until they were off the damaged section. Then he stood again. Though stood was generous, it was more of a controlled collapse into an upright position and continued across the bridge. When his boots finally touched solid ground on the eastern bank, Tom nearly wept with relief. He sank down against a tree, holding the cub, trying to gather enough strength for the final push. The access road was still at least a mile away through the forest. In his current condition, it might as well have been 100. His radio crackled. "Mitchell, Chen here. The bear is in the vehicle. We're preparing to transport her to the wildlife center. What's your location?" Tom fumbled for the radio. "East Bank. Have the cub. Moving toward access road." "Tom, you sound bad. Stay where you are. We're sending Derek back with the ATV. He'll find you." "No need," Tom said, though he wasn't sure he believed it. "I can make it." "That wasn't a request, Mitchell. Stay put. Derek is already on his way." Tom wanted to argue, but the truth was he wasn't sure he could make it another mile. His body was past its limits. "Copy," he finally said. "I'll wait here." He settled back against the tree, the cub curled in his lap. It had stopped whimpering and was now looking up at him with those dark, intelligent eyes. Tom stroked its head gently, and the cub leaned into his touch. "Your mama's tough," Tom said softly. "She held on because of you. Do you know that? She could have given up, but she didn't, because you needed her." The cub made a small sound, almost like a response. Tom closed his eyes just for a moment, just to rest. The cold didn't seem as sharp anymore, which some distant part of his mind recognized as dangerous, but he was so tired. The cub's warmth against his chest was comforting, anchoring. He could hear the river in the distance, and the wind in the trees, and somewhere far away, the sound of an engine. "Tom!" Derek's voice cut through the fog. Tom's eyes snapped open. When had he closed them? And he saw the young ranger running toward him, followed by Paula. The ATV was parked 20 yards back on a narrow trail Tom hadn't even noticed. Derek dropped to his knees beside him. "Jesus, Tom, you're hypothermic. We need to get you warm now." Paula was already pulling emergency heating packs from a bag, cracking them to activate the chemical reaction. She and Derek wrapped them around Tom's core, his neck under his arms. Someone draped multiple blankets over him. The cub, startled by all the activity, tried to scramble away, but Paula caught it gently. "Easy, little one. We've got you too." "The cub," Tom slurred, trying to reach for it. "Need to keep it safe." "The cub is fine," Derek assured him, gripping Tom's shoulder firmly. "You did it, Tom. You got both of them. Now we need to take care of you." They helped him to his feet. More accurately, they lifted him to his feet and half carried, half walked him to the ATV. Paula secured the cub in a transport crate they'd brought, lined with blankets. The cub protested initially, but exhaustion won out, and it curled up inside, watching Tom through the metal grating. The ride back to the access road was a blur. Tom drifted in and out of consciousness, aware of movement, of voices, of the cub's periodic whimpers from its crate. When they reached the vehicles, there was more activity. Dr. Chen checking his vitals, someone radioing for an ambulance, heated blankets being wrapped around him more securely. "Stubborn idiot," Dr. Chen muttered affectionately as she checked his temperature. 87 degrees. Another 30 minutes out there, and we'd be planning your funeral. "The cub," Tom managed to say, "need to keep it with its mother." Dr. Chen's expression softened. "The cub is going to the same wildlife center. We'll keep them together if we can. You have my word." Tom nodded, satisfied. His eyes found the transport crate where the cub sat, still watching him. Their eyes met. And in that moment, Tom felt something shift inside him, some frozen part of his heart that had been locked away for 5 years, beginning to thaw. "You're going to be okay, little one," he whispered. "Both of you." "Ndeem." As they loaded him into the ambulance, the last thing Tom saw before the doors closed was Derek carefully lifting the cub's crate into a separate vehicle, Paula's hand resting gently on top, a gesture of protection and promise. Tom woke to the sterile smell of disinfectant and the steady beep of a heart monitor. His body felt heavy, distant, as if it belonged to someone else. For a moment he couldn't remember where he was or how he'd gotten there. Then the memories flooded back, the river, the trap, the cub's warm weight against his chest. He tried to sit up, but his muscles refused to cooperate. A hand pressed gently on his shoulder. "Easy, Dad. You need to rest." Tom's eyes focused, and his breath caught. Emily sat beside the hospital bed, her face lined with worry and something else, something he hadn't seen in years. Concern, care. The lines around her eyes had deepened since he'd last seen her, and her hair was shorter, but she was still his daughter. Still the person he'd pushed away because the pain of connection had felt too dangerous. "Em!" His voice came out as a croak. She smiled, though tears were pooling in her eyes. "Yeah, it's me. Paula called me last night, told me what you did." She shook her head. "Crossing a river in near-freezing water to save a bear. That's so completely reckless and so completely you." "The cub," Tom said urgently, trying again to sit up. "The mother, are they—" "They're alive," Emily said quickly, helping him adjust the pillows so he could recline more comfortably. "Dr. Chen called a couple hours ago. The mother made it through surgery. They had to amputate part of the leg. The damage was too severe, but she's stable. Strong vital signs. They're cautiously optimistic." Relief flooded through Tom so powerfully that his eyes stung. "And the cub?" Emily's smile widened. "Healthy, scared and hungry, but healthy. They kept them in adjacent enclosures overnight, so the cub could see and smell its mother. Dr. Chen said the little one hasn't stopped watching her." Tom closed his eyes, letting the news sink in. They'd made it. Against all odds, they'd both made it. "You scared me, Dad." Emily's voice was soft now, vulnerable. "When Paula told me how they found you, barely conscious, your body temperature in the danger zone." She paused, wiping at her eyes. "I thought I was going to lose you. And I realized we've barely spoken in 2 years, and that's on both of us, but mostly it's been on me. I was so angry at you for not moving on after Mom died, for staying in that isolated station, for pushing me away. But I pushed back instead of pushing through." Tom reached for her hand, his fingers still clumsy from the lingering effects of hypothermia. "I'm the one who shut down, Em. After your mother, I didn't know how to be a person anymore. I didn't know how to let anyone close. It was easier to be alone in the forest than to face the fact that she was gone, and I didn't know how to live without her. But yesterday," Emily said, squeezing his hand, "you risked everything for a bear and her baby. You didn't shut down, you showed up." Tom thought about that, about the moment he'd decided to cross the river, about carrying the cub through the forest, about refusing to give up even when his body was failing. That cub wouldn't give up on its mother. It walked miles, alone and terrified, trying to find help. How could I give up on either of them after that? Emily was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Mom would have loved this story. She always said you had the biggest heart of anyone she knew, even when you tried to hide it." Tom's throat tightened. "I miss her every day." "I know, so do I." Emily leaned forward. "But Dad, she wouldn't want you to stop living. And yesterday, for the first time in 5 years, you really lived. You did something impossible because it mattered." Before Tom could respond, there was a knock on the door. Dr. Chen entered, looking tired but pleased. She carried a tablet and wore scrubs instead of her field gear. "Mitchell, you're awake. Good. Your vitals are much better. Core temperature is back to normal, no signs of frostbite. You got lucky there, and your leg wound is superficial. You'll be sore for a while, but you should make a full recovery." She glanced at Emily. "You can thank your daughter. She's been here since midnight, making sure the nurses checked on you every hour." "That sounds like her," Tom said, smiling at Emily. Dr. Chen pulled up a chair. "I thought you'd want an update on your bears. The mother came through surgery about 3 hours ago. We removed the lower portion of her left hind leg and cleaned out the infection. She'll never be releasable back into the wild, A three-legged bear can't hunt or defend territory effectively, but she can live comfortably in a wildlife sanctuary. We're in contact with a facility in Montana that specializes in disabled bears. They have a large habitat area, and she'll be well cared for. Tom nodded slowly, processing. And the cub? That's more complicated, Dr. Chen said. The cub is young enough that it could potentially be rehabilitated and released in a year or two, once it's big enough to survive on its own. But she paused, choosing her words carefully. It's been through significant trauma. It's bonded strongly to its mother, and separating them could cause additional psychological stress. Plus, there's another factor. She turned the tablet around, showing Tom a video. It showed the cub in an enclosure, standing on its hind legs against a chain-link fence. On the other side, the mother bear lay on a bed of straw, heavily bandaged, an IV still in her foreleg. The cub was crying, soft, desperate sounds, and the mother was responding, making low, chuffing noises. Even through the fence, even in her weakened state, she was trying to comfort her baby. Tom felt his chest constrict watching it. We moved the mother into recovery this morning and placed the cub in the adjacent space, Dr. Chen explained. The reaction was immediate. The mother became more alert, more responsive. Her heart rate stabilized, and the cub finally ate. It had refused food until it could see its mother. They need each other. So keep them together, Tom said, in the sanctuary. That's the plan, Dr. Chen confirmed. The Montana facility has agreed to take both. They'll have separate but connected enclosures. The cub will need gradual independence as it grows, but they'll be able to interact, and the mother can continue to teach the cub essential behaviors. It's not ideal, but given the circumstances, it's the best outcome we could hope for. Tom exhaled slowly. Not perfect, but alive. Together. Safe. There's one more thing, Dr. Chen said. The sanctuary director asked if you'd be willing to visit before they're transported. They want to document the story, not for publicity, but for education. What you did yesterday, Tom, the risks you took, the determination you showed, it matters. It shows people why wildlife conservation is important, why every life counts. Tom glanced at Emily, who nodded encouragingly. When? He asked. Tomorrow, if you're discharged. The transport is scheduled for the day after. I'll be there, Tom said. The next afternoon, Tom stood outside the Wildlife Center's recovery facility, leaning heavily on a cane the hospital had insisted he use. Emily stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm. Through the large observation window, he could see two enclosures separated by a fence, and in them the two bears who had changed his life. The mother lay on her side, resting but alert. Her back left leg ended in clean white bandages. She looked smaller somehow, more vulnerable without the forest around her, but her eyes were clear and aware. In the adjacent enclosure, the cub paced excitedly, occasionally standing to paw at the dividing fence. The mother would chuff softly each time, a sound of reassurance. Dr. Chen approached from inside the facility. We're going to open the connecting gate for supervised interaction. Want to watch? Tom nodded, unable to speak. A technician inside carefully slid open the gate between the enclosures. The cub didn't hesitate. It rushed through and immediately pressed against its mother's side, nuzzling her face, her neck, making happy chirping sounds. The mother, despite her injuries and exhaustion, curled her body protectively around her baby, grooming it with her tongue, checking it over with the thoroughness only a mother could manage. Tom watched, and something inside him broke open, not painfully but like ice cracking in spring, making way for water to flow again. He thought about Sarah, about all the moments he'd shut down instead of letting himself feel. He thought about Emily, and the years of distance he'd allowed to build between them. He thought about the cub, who had walked miles through dangerous forest because love, instinct, connection, whatever you wanted to call it, wouldn't let it give up. Dad, Emily's voice was gentle, you're crying. Tom reached up and was surprised to find his face wet. He didn't bother wiping the tears away. "They found each other," he said. "After everything, they found each other." Emily slipped her arm around his waist, and Tom wrapped his arm around her shoulders, pulling her close. They stood like that for a long time, watching the bears, neither of them speaking. There would be time later for all the conversations they needed to have, for rebuilding what had been broken. But right now, this moment was enough. Inside the enclosure, the cub had fallen asleep against its mother's belly, one small paw resting on her foreleg. The mother's eyes were half closed, but Tom could see her chest rising and falling with steady, peaceful breaths. Safe, together, alive, just like him and Emily, starting over. 3 months later, Tom stood at the edge of a snow-dusted clearing in Montana, his breath forming clouds in the cold February air. The wildlife sanctuary sprawled across 200 acres of protected forest, and somewhere within it, behind secure fencing designed to keep the bears safe and comfortable, were the 2 lives he'd risked everything to save. Emily stood beside him, bundled in a thick winter coat, her cheeks flushed from the cold. She'd taken a week off from the hospital in Portland to make this trip with him, and they'd spent the last 2 days driving through mountain passes, talking more than they had in 5 years. About Sarah, about grief, about the walls they'd both built, and were now slowly dismantling, brick by brick. "Ready?" asked Maria Gonzalez, the sanctuary director, a woman in her 50s with kind eyes and weathered hands. She held a keyring and gestured toward a path leading deeper into the facility. Tom nodded, gripping his cane. He still needed it for longer walks, though Dr. Chen had assured him that with time and physical therapy he'd regain full strength. The scars on his leg had healed into thin white lines, a permanent reminder of that day at the river. They walked along a winding path through dormant winter trees until they reached a large observation deck overlooking an expansive enclosure. Maria unlocked the gate, and they stepped onto the wooden platform. Below them, separated by 40 feet of vertical distance and reinforced fencing, was a habitat carefully designed to mimic natural forest. Fallen logs, rock formations, a small stream that somehow remained unfrozen, dense vegetation, and several elevated dens built into the hillside. "There," Emily whispered, pointing. Near the stream, the mother bear sat in a patch of winter sunlight. She was heavier now, healthier, her fur thick and glossy. Her missing leg had healed completely, and she'd adapted to the 3-legged gait with remarkable grace. She was eating from a pile of fruit and vegetation, methodical and calm. And beside her, significantly larger than Tom remembered, was the cub, though cub hardly fit anymore. In 3 months it had nearly doubled in size, its features less baby-like, more juvenile. It wrestled playfully with a log, rolling it with surprising strength, occasionally looking to its mother as if seeking approval. "They're doing wonderfully," Maria said, her voice warm with pride. "The mother's physical recovery exceeded our expectations. She's one of the most resilient animals I've worked with. And the young one, we've started calling him Journey, by the way, because of his story, is developing exactly as he should. Strong, curious, healthy. Journey," Tom repeated softly. It fit perfectly. As if hearing his name, the young bear stopped playing and looked up toward the observation deck. Tom would never know if the bear actually recognized him. 3 months was a long time in an animal's memory, and bears didn't bond with humans the way dogs might. But for just a moment, Journey stared directly at Tom, his dark eyes intelligent and alert. Then he returned to his mother's side, pressing against her briefly before wandering off to investigate a hollow log. The mother bear also glanced up toward the deck. Her gaze lingered longer, and Tom had the irrational feeling that she knew, that somehow she understood he was the reason she was still alive, still with her baby. She huffed once, not aggressive, just acknowledgement, and returned to her meal. "What happens next for them?" Emily asked Maria. "They'll stay together for at least another year, maybe 18 months, Maria explained. Journey will gradually become more independent as adolescence progresses. That's natural bear behavior. Eventually, he'll need his own space, and we'll transition him to an adjacent territory where he can still see and smell his mother but establish his own routine. The mother will live here for the rest of her life, 20, maybe 25 years if she stays healthy. Journey's future depends on his development. If he remains too habituated to humans or shows he can't function independently, he'll stay here permanently. If he proves wild enough and capable enough, we might consider a release program in a few years, though that's rare. Tom watched them together, mother and son, and felt a peace he hadn't known was possible. They weren't living the life they would have had in the wild, but they were alive. They had each other. They had safety, food, care. It wasn't perfect, but it was enough. "I've been thinking about what you said," Emily said quietly, her eyes still on the bears. "About showing up. About not giving up on the people or animals who need you." Tom glanced at her. "Yeah? I'm moving back," she said. "Not to your station. That place is too isolated even for you." She smiled slightly. "But I've been offered a position at the regional hospital, 40 minutes from your ranger station. I accepted it this morning." Tom's heart swelled. You don't have to do that. Your life in Portland is fine," she interrupted, "but it's not where I want to be. These last 3 months, reconnecting with you, I realized I'd been running from grief just like you were. I buried myself in work, in a city where nobody knew Mum, where I could pretend the loss didn't exist. But it does exist, and I'm tired of running from it. I'm tired of being alone when I have a father who, despite being a stubborn idiot sometimes, would cross freezing rivers for creatures that need him." Tom pulled her into a hug, and Emily wrapped her arms around him tightly. They stayed like that for a long moment. Two people who'd lost their way finding each other again in the shadow of the very bears that had reminded them what love required. Risk, courage, and the willingness to show up even when it was hard. When they separated, Maria was smiling. "I love witnessing reunions," she said. "Human or animal, they're always beautiful." They spent another hour at the sanctuary, watching the bears, learning about the other residents. A wolf with a permanent leg injury, an eagle that couldn't fly, a fox that had been orphaned too young to survive alone. Each animal had a story, and each story involved someone who'd chosen not to give up. Rangers, veterinarians, ordinary people who'd seen suffering and decided to act. As they prepared to leave, Tom took one last look at the enclosure. Journey was climbing a tree, or trying to, his size making it more challenging than he seemed to expect. The mother bear watched from below, making small, encouraging sounds. When Journey finally reached a low branch and looked down triumphantly, Tom could have sworn the mother bear looked proud. "Thank you," Tom said to Maria, shaking her hand, "for giving them this." "Thank you," Maria replied, "for giving them a chance. Most people would have called it in and walked away. You didn't. That made all the difference." The drive back through the mountains was quiet, contemplative. Emily drove while Tom sat in the passenger seat, watching the landscape roll by. Snow-covered peaks, frozen streams, forest stretching endlessly. This was the world the mother bear and Journey would have known, the life they would have lived. It hadn't worked out that way, but they'd survived. They'd adapted. They'd found a different kind of home. "What are you thinking about?" Emily asked. Tom considered the question. "I'm thinking that for 5 years I've been like that cub, lost, alone, wandering in circles, not knowing how to move forward. And it took watching an animal refuse to give up on its mother to realize I'd given up on everything that mattered. My connection to you, my connection to the world, even my connection to myself. And now?" Emily's voice was gentle. "Now I'm trying to be more like that mother bear," Tom said. "She survived something that should have killed her. She adapted to a new reality. She kept taking care of her baby even when everything was broken. That takes more courage than I've shown in years." Emily reached over and squeezed his hand briefly before returning it to the wheel. "You showed plenty of courage, Dad. You're showing it right now." They drove in comfortable silence for a while. Then Tom said, "I'm going to call more, visit more. Maybe we can have dinner once a week when you move back." "I'd like that," Emily said, smiling. "And Dad, I'm proud of you. Mom would be too." Tom felt his eyes sting again, but this time he didn't fight the tears. He let them come, let himself feel the grief and the joy and the hope all mixed together. The landscape blurred outside the window, and he thought about the mother bear and journey, about the river that had separated them and the bridge that had brought them back together. Sometimes the distance between lost and found was just someone willing to cross the river, someone willing to risk everything because another life, any life, mattered enough to try. Tom had crossed his river, and on the other side, he'd found not just two bears, but himself, the version of himself Sarah had always believed existed beneath the grief and isolation, the version Emily had been waiting for, the version that knew how to show up, how to hold on, how to love even when it was hard. Outside the window, the sun began to set over the mountains, painting the snow in shades of gold and rose. Tom closed his eyes and felt, for the first time in 5 years, genuinely grateful to be alive. Behind them, in a sanctuary nestled in the Montana wilderness, a mother bear and her growing son curled up together in their den as darkness fell. Safe, together, home. And somewhere in the vast forest of the world, other creatures struggled and survived, loved and lost, fought their way back from the edge, each with their own story, each worthy of someone willing to cross the river. Tell us in the comments where you're watching from, and if you've ever witnessed or lived something like this.